In Livy's account, Tarquinius Priscus had been elected king on the death of the previous king, Ancus Marcius, whose 2 sons were too young to inherit or offer themselves for election. When Servius' popularity and his marriage to Tarquinius' daughter made him a likely successor to the throne, these sons attempted to seize the throne for themselves. They hired 2 assassins, who attacked and severely wounded Tarquinius. Tanaquil immediately ordered the palace to be shut, and publicly announced from a palace window that Tarquinius had appointed Servius as regent. Meanwhile, Tarquinius died of his wounds. When his death became public knowledge, the Senate elected Servius as king, and the sons of Ancus fled to exile in Suessa Pomcia. Livy describes this as the first occasion that the people of Rome were not involved in the election of the king. In Plutarch, Servius reluctantly consented to the kingship at the deathbed insistence of Tanaquil. Early in his reign, Servius warred against Veii and the Etruscans. He is said to have shown valor in the campaign, and to have routed a great army of the enemy. His success helped him to cement his position at Rome. According to the Fasti Triumphals, Servius celebrated 3 triumphs over the Etruscans, including on November 25, 571 BC and May 25, 567 BC. The date of the 3rd triumph is not legible on the Fasti. Most of the reforms credited to Servius extended voting rights to certain groups, in particular to Rome's citizen commoners known in the Republican era as plebs, minor landholders previously disqualified from voting by ancestry, status, or ethnicity. The same reforms simultaneously define the fiscal and military obligations of all Roman citizens. As a whole, the so-called Servian reforms probably represent a long-drawn, complex, and piecemeal process of populist policy and reform, extending from Servius' predecessors, Ancus Marcius and Tarquinius Priscus, to his successor Tarquinius Superbus, and into the Middle and Late Republic. Rome's military and territorial expansion and consequent changes in its population would have made franchise regulation and reform an ongoing necessity, and their wholesale attribution to Servius cannot be taken at face value. Until the Servian reforms, the passing of laws and judgment was the prerogative of the Comitia Curiata, Curiate Assembly, made up from 30 curii. Roman sources describe 10 curii for each of 3 aristocratic tribes or clans, each supposedly based on one of Rome's central hills, and claiming patrician status by virtue of their descent from Rome's founding families. These tribes comprised approximately 200 gentes, clans, each of which contributed 1 senator, elder to the Senate. The Senate advised the king, devised laws in his name, and was held to represent the entire populus Romanus, Roman people, but it could only debate and discuss. Its decisions had no force unless approved by the Comitia Curiata. By the time of Servius, if not long before, the tribes of the Comitia were a minority of the population, ruling a multitude who had no effective voice in their own government. Rome's far more populous citizen commoners could participate in this assembly in limited fashion, and perhaps offer their opinions on decisions, but only the Comitia Curiata could vote. A minority thus exercised power and control over the majority. Roman tradition held that Servius formed a Comitia Centuriata of commoners to displace the Comitia Curiata as Rome's central legislative body. This required his development of the first Roman census, making Servius the first Roman censor. For the purposes of the census, citizens assembled by tribe in the Campus Martius to register their social rank, household, property, and income. This established an individual's tax obligations, his ability to muster arms for military service when required to do so, and his assignment to a particular voting bloc. The institution of the census and the Comitia Centuriata are speculated as Servius' attempt to erode the civil and military power of the Roman aristocracy, and seek the direct support of his newly enfranchised citizenry in civil matters, if necessary, under arms. The comitia curata continued to function through the regal and republican eras, but the Servian reform had reduced its powers to those of a largely symbolic upper house. Its noble members were expected to do no more than ratify decisions of the comitia centuriata. The census grouped Rome's male citizen population in classes, according to status, wealth, and age. Each class was subdivided into groups called centurii, centuries, nominally of 100 men but in practice of variable number, further divided as seniors, men aged 46 to 60, of a suitable age to serve as home guards or city police, and iunieres, men aged 17 to 45, to serve as front line troops when required. Adult male citizens were obliged, when called upon, to fulfill military service according to their means, which was supposedly assessed in archaic asses. A citizen's wealth and class would, therefore, have defined their position in the civil hierarchies, and up to a point, within the military, but despite its apparent military character, and its possible origins as the mustering of the citizenry, at arms, the system would have primarily served to determine the voting qualifications and wealth of individual citizens for taxation purposes, and the weight of their vote. Wars were occasional but taxation was a constant necessity, and the comitia centuriata met whenever required to do so, in peace or war. Though each century had voting rights, the wealthiest had the most centuries, and voted first. Those beneath them were convened only in the event of deadlock or indecision. The lowest class was unlikely to vote at all. The Roman army's centuria's system and its order of battle are thought to be based on the civilian classifications established by the census. The military selection process picked men from civilian centurii and slipped them into military ones. Their function depended on their age, experience, and the equipment they could afford. The wealthiest class of iunieres were armed as hoplites, heavy infantry with helmet, greaves, breastplate, shields, clapus, and spears, hasti. Each battle line in the phalanx formation was composed of a single class. Military specialists, such as trumpeters, were chosen from the fifth class. The highest officers were of aristocratic origin until the early republic, when the first plebeian tribunes were elected by the plebeians from their own number. Cornell suggests that the centuriate system made the equites, who consisted mainly, if not exclusively, of patricians but voted after infantry of the first class, subordinate to the relatively low-status infantry. The Servian reforms increased the number of tribes and expanded the city, which was protected by a new rampart, moat, and wall. The enclosed area was divided into 4 administrative regions, or quarters: the Suburana, Esquilana, Collina, and Palatina. Servius himself is said to have taken a new residence, on the Esquiline. The situation beyond the walls is unclear, but thereafter, membership of a Roman voting tribe would have depended on residence rather than kinship, ancestry, and inheritance. This would have brought significant numbers of urban and rural plebs into active political life, and a significant number of these would have been allocated to centuries of the first class, and therefore likely to vote. The city of Rome's division into quarters remained in use until 7 BC, when Augustus divided the city into 14 new regions. In modern Rome, an ancient portion of surviving wall is attributed to Servius, the remainder supposedly being rebuilt after the sack of Rome in 390 or 387 BC by the Gauls. Some Roman historians believed Servius Tullius responsible for Rome's earliest true, minted coinage, replacing an earlier and less convenient currency of raw bullion. This is unlikely, though he may have introduced the official stamping of raw currency. Money played a minimal role in the Roman economy, which was almost entirely agrarian at this time. Debt and debt bondage, however, were probably rife. The form of such debts would have had little resemblance to those of cash debtors, compelled to pay interest to money lenders on an advance of capital. Rather, wealthy landowners would make an advance loan of seed, foodstuffs, or other essentials to tenants, clients and smallholders, in return for a promise of labor services or a substantial share of the crop. The terms of such loans compelled defaulters to sell themselves, or their dependents, to their creditor, or, if smallholders, to surrender their farm. Wealthy aristocratic landholders thus acquired additional farms and service for very little outlay. Dionysius claims that Servius paid such debts from his own purse, and forbade voluntary and compulsory debt bondage. In reality, these practices persisted well into the Republican era. Livy describes the distribution of land grants to poor and landless citizens by Servius and others as the political pursuit of popular support from citizens of little merit or worth. Servius is credited with the construction of Diana's temple on the Aventine Hill, to mark the foundation of the so-called Latin League, his servile birth mythos, his populist leanings and his reorganization of the Vici appear to justify the Roman belief that he founded or reformed the Compitalia festivals held to celebrate the Lares that watched over each local community, or allowed for the first time their attendance and service by non-citizens and slaves. His personal reputation and achievements may have led to his historical association with temples and shrines to Fortuna. Some sources suggest that the two were connected during Servius' lifetime, via some form of sacred marriage. Plutarch explicitly identifies the Porta Fenestella, window gate of the royal palace, as the window from which Tanaquil announced Servius' regency to the people. The goddess Fortuna was said to have passed through the same window, to become Servius' consort. In Livy's history, Servius Tullius had two daughters, Tullia the elder and Tullia the younger. He arranged their marriage to the two sons of his predecessor, Lucius Tarquinius and Aruns Tarquinius. The younger Tullia and Lucius procured the murders of their respective siblings, married, and conspired to remove Servius Tullius. Tullia Minor encouraged Lucius Tarquinius to secretly persuade or bribe senators, and Tarquinius went to the Senate house with a group of armed men. Then he summoned the senators and gave a speech criticizing Servius, for being a slave born of a slave, for failing to be elected by the Senate and the people during an interregnum, as had been the tradition for the election of kings of Rome, for being gifted the throne by a woman, for favoring the lower classes of Rome over the wealthy, for taking the land of the upper classes for distribution to the poor, and for instituting the census, which exposed the wealthy upper classes to popular envy. When Servius Tullius arrived at the Senate house to defend his position, Tarquinius threw him down the steps and Servius was murdered in the street by Tarquin's men. Soon after, Tullia drove her chariot over her father's body. For Livy, Tarquinius' impious refusal to permit his father-in-law's burial earned him the sobriquet superbus, arrogant or proud, and Servius' death is a tragic crime, tragicum salus, a dark episode in Rome's history and just cause for the abolition of the monarchy. Servius thus becomes the last of Rome's benevolent kings. The place of this outrage, which Livy seems to suggest as a crossroads, is known thereafter as Vicus Celeritas, street of shame, infamy, or crime. His murder is parricide, the worst of all crimes. This morally justifies Tarquin's eventual expulsion and the abolition of Rome's aberrant, un-Roman monarchy. Livy's republic is partly founded on the achievements and death of Rome's last benevolent king.